Hello Year 11. This presentation is going to take you through the Paper 1 Section 1 that is part of your HSC examination. So our learning goals for this lesson is for you to learn about the HSC Paper 1 Section 1. I want you to be really well prepared for when you do your exam. And the best way for you to be prepared is to practice and to have regular opportunities to see what the exam looks like, see what the types of questions are, practice writing your answers. Otherwise, you'll get to your trials next year and that will be the first time that you see a paper like this. So it's really important that we practice and that we see that you are improving each time. We're also having a look at this paper to understand the skills that you need to write effective answers. Now, I've been marking this section for many years and I can predict the areas where students will struggle, where students will not write the right answer, and what areas kids will really struggle with. And so it's really a great opportunity for you to know the pitfalls, know where students just don't really get the right answers and how you can avoid that. So what you'll need for this lesson is this handout, Paper 1 Section 1 Practice Paper. You can download that from our files section. It would be great if you had that with you as we go through this lesson. You can print it out if you want to, or you can just have it on your computer. It's up to you. But it'd be really great if you had a pen or a highlighter or something, some way of making notes, because it'll be quite valuable for you to make notes as you go through this presentation. This will really help you to remember, because after we go through all this, next lesson, you are going to do this practice paper and I'm going to mark your answers. So the more that you engage and the more that you take notes, the more that you will understand and remember, and the better your answers will be. Okay, before I go through the Paper 1 Section 1 that we're going to be looking at today, I thought it might be helpful for you to have a good understanding of what the HSC examination will actually look like. This is the beast, what you always hear about. And so I'd like you to have an opportunity to see what all the fuss is about. So when you do the HSC examination for Advanced English, you will sit two papers. Paper 1 is the common module, and you'll sit this first on one day. It'll be 2 hours, and it's split into two sections, and the first section is your short answer. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. Paper 1, Section 1, short answer. So this paper 1, is the common module, and this module is what everyone in the state, advanced and standard, this is what everyone is studying. So everyone is doing the common module. Everyone is doing text and human experiences. So everyone will sit Section 1. Now they do differentiate the paper, and this year, and they did this last year as well, they had slightly easier questions for standard and they had slightly harder questions for advanced, and they did have some questions that were common to both papers. So you will sit Paper 1 first, you'll do Section 1 short answer, and then you will do Section 2, which is an extended response. Traditionally, students write an essay, and this is done on your related text. So well, what we call, sorry, I should say, it is, you will write it on your prescribed text. So this is the core text that you study in the common module, and you will study other texts as well. But when it comes to the examination, you will need to write an extended response about the common module and your prescribed text. And then you'll come back the next day and you will do paper 2. And this is where you will write responses on the modules. So that's module A, module B, and module C. And all of these are, again, extended responses. So this is where you essentially will write an essay. Now, I have written here extended responses are not essays because they can ask you to write a different text form other than an essay. So if they wanted to, they could ask you to write a speech, or they could ask you to write a persuasive response. They haven't, but it's left fairly open, and it's open because you yourself might choose to write in a particular way that is not strictly an essay. But I feel like the essay is the best way to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding and your skills. Okay, so that is the exam, paper 1 and paper 2. So for today, we are going to look at this section here, short answer section. I feel like this section is the one where it's the easiest to get the maximum marks if you switch on to the best way to get the marks. And a lot of the time it's just switching your brain onto, all right, these are the rules, this is what I've got to do, and I just need to make sure I do it. Okay, so I just want to take you through what this paper 1, section 1, looks like. Paper from that my Year 12 class last year did in their trial examination. So you can see the first text they have is an image, then they have a poem, then there's another poem, there's a non-fiction, and then there's a fiction extract at the end. So you can see that there is 5 different texts. They're all relatively short, and they are what we call unseen. So these are texts that they expect that no one has studied in class, no one is familiar with them, everybody is in the same position where they've seen this for the first time. And then you get a series of short answer questions. So these days they give you space to write. You can see that they give you the marks for each question. You will give yourself about 45 minutes to answer this question. And you can see at the end, the last question is longer and more marks. And then just to show you the next section, this is what the section 2 looks like. You're given a stimulus. The purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you the questions to think upon. And then it says, evaluate this statement in relation to your prescribed text. And then that's where you have an opportunity to write an extended response. Okay, so that's section 2, but we're not looking at that today. We're going to focus on section 1. So I just want to start by taking you through just some tips and tricks of how you can approach this paper. So take note of this and take note of the steps that I suggest you go through so that when you come to sit and do the paper, you can practice going through those steps too. So the key before you begin is to think about the what and the how questions. So firstly, think about what's being said. With most of the questions, there will be an idea that they want you to identify, they want you to explain, or they want you to describe. So they will give you a specific idea and you need to demonstrate that you can find that idea in the text and you can articulate what is being said. Then you need to, for most of the questions, you need to be able to articulate how it's being said. How is this idea being represented in the text? And this is the hardest part of section 1. And it's the one that will really distinguish your response above others. And that's because it's about techniques. How well you can analyze how someone is expressing their ideas. Okay, so my first tip for you is to read. You are given 10 minutes reading time in the exam. You're not allowed to pick up a pen, you're not allowed to write anything down, but you can read. So read before you do anything else. And think about what you should actually be reading. So I really suggest that you spend that time reading the texts. Read through every single text that you are given in the stimulus booklet. Don't just read them once. You have 10 minutes, so you can definitely read them more than once. And once you've read the texts and you know exactly what's in them, then you read the questions. It's really important that you know what the question is asking, because then you can go back and read the text again and look for the answer. And this also helps you to check that you don't answer the question in the next part, or that you are not working harder than you need to. It's really also very important that you identify the terms used in the questions. There are specific HSC English terms that are used in the questions, and these you need to be familiar with. It's almost like another language. You need to know what these words mean, and you need to know how they are being used so that you know the sort of answer that you need to give. So for example, you might get the question, you might get the word in the question identify. So when you see identify, it means that they want you to pick out the techniques or the features, describe and name them, and perhaps, depending on the question and the number of marks, state why they have been used. You might also get the word explain. This question asks you not only the what or the how, but also the why. You can also get the other big keyword, analyze. And when you see the word analyze, it's telling you to break down a text and identify its individual components. It might also involve investigating the relationship between the different aspects of the text, and you also need to draw conclusions. This is a really important concept. Too often students just retell the text and just sort of tell me what's in it rather than actually analysing. You also will see the word describe, not often in this section 1, but sometimes you can. And that just means to provide characteristics and features. That's just showing what you know. And there's also compare. Show how things are similar. So when you see compare, you got to think similarities. When you see contrast, that means see how things are different. Sometimes you might get compare and contrast. Often you will only get compare. So when you're looking at the questions, I think it's really important to look at these keywords and think about which ones are being used in the questions. And when the 10 minutes reading time is over, I really recommend that you go through and you highlight the keywords in the questions so that it really puts that in the forefront of your mind. This is the kind of answer I need to be giving. Often when I see student responses to this section, they give me a really good answer in the first 1 or 2 questions, and then the quality of their answers seem to peter out, and their responses at the end of the text where they really need to give all they've got, they often give me very short and brief answers. So the trick to section 1 is to really read and understand the questions and know exactly what you need to do. Okay, let's move on. Tip 2. I'd like you to focus on the marks. Look at the marks. You will see that marks are awarded in each question. It will indicate to you how long you should spend on an answer and how much you should be writing. Okay, so for example, if the question is 1 mark, this means that you just need to write 1 sentence or 2. That's it. Answer the question, move on. If it's a 2 mark question, then you're looking at giving, probably, I would suggest, you're writing more of a paragraph. So 2 marks would be a paragraph where you want to ensure that you're doing 1 example, 1 of those IQVAs, where you identify 1 specific technique and you explain it. If you are looking at a 3 mark question, think 2 or 3 paragraphs, which means 2 or 3 examples, 2 or 3 IQVAs. And again, if it's 4 marks, then just think, yep, 4 marks. It's just 3 or 4 paragraphs, 3 or 4 examples. 3 or 4 times I need to identify and analyze. When it's a 5 or more mark question, 5 or more mark question, you're going beyond 4 paragraphs. You're doing 5+ paragraphs, and you are making connections between the texts. You are being detailed. So anytime you see 5 or more marks, this is when you need to think extended response. You can't expect to get 5 marks when you only write 1 or 2 paragraphs. You just have not given the detail that you need. So as you might get the sense, in this paper, in section 1, you are given a series of questions, and the questions increase in their marks as you go through. So usually the first question is only about 1 to 3 marks, and it's an opportunity for you just warming up. It's a bit more straightforward, and as you progress through the paper, the questions are going to get a little harder and they're going to expect more of you. So you need to expect the last question is going to be where you need to give a really detailed and lengthy response. So you've got 45 minutes, so be aware of your time and how you can manage your time for each question. Look at the marks and make sure your answer is reflecting how much that question is worth. So here's an example of a paper. So you can see here, how is the pleasure of discovery revealed in the feature article? That's 2 marks. And then you've got another 3 mark here for and the last one is 6. This other paper here, you can see 2 marks, 2 marks, 3, 3, and then 5. So you can see how it progresses through. Okay, tip 3. You need to know your techniques. Different forms use different techniques. So be aware that if you're looking at a poem will have specific techniques and you need to be familiar with the poem. If you're looking at a fiction text, it will have specific techniques. If you're looking at a speech, it will have specific techniques. Essentially, there's a whole variety of techniques that you could know, but sometimes it's really good to start with just looking at the basics, like the setting. Where does the action take place? Why? Does the setting have symbolic meaning? And we looked at setting when we looked at our Ray Bradbury stories. So think about what you learned about the setting from those stories, and see if it takes and is a significant role in the text that you're looking at. Or maybe characters. Think about if there is a main character, how are they portrayed? Do they develop? Do they have a distinctive voice? The minor characters, what effect do they have on the protagonist? Do they have any effect on the structure? Think about when you're looking at characters, think about the purpose that they serve. And then structure. What holds the text together? Is the structure linear? Is it cyclic? Does it flash back? Does it flash forward? Look at sentences, look at paragraphs. How is everything being held together to create a particular effect, like tension or a particular mood or atmosphere? Also, think about narrative voice. Is it first, second, or third narrative perspective? What's the effect of that? Think about also when it's written in first or third person, and occasionally it might flip into second person using you, and it's directly addressing the reader. And be aware, I always say, pay attention to the personal pronouns. There is a particular effect that writers create when they are using first person. It's personal, it's intimate, it creates a very distinct voice, whereas third person is very different and it has a different effect. So you can make note of that when you're looking at these unseen texts. Imagery is something else that is really important to take note of. When we talk about imagery, we are talking about metaphors, personifications, similes, symbolism, allusions, motifs, etc. You can also be looking at oral techniques. So these are the sound devices. Repetition, onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, sibilance. Think about the vocabulary. What can you identify about the word choice, the connotations? Some words have positive connotations, other words have negative connotations. Can you really be aware of those subtleties in the English language? Emotive terms. Lots of words carry with them this emotional baggage. So can you identify the emotional baggage of those words, and can you identify what the writer is trying to do in deliberately selecting those words? And also pay attention to repetition. That's probably the one thing that I say to look for first. It's often the easiest thing to identify. And even if you don't talk about it in your answers, but if you identify whether words or phrases, ideas or images have been repeated then that helps you to identify the ideas in the text. If there's a word or an idea or an image that's popped up more than once, then that draws your attention to it, and it shows you that the writer is trying to demonstrate that this is important. And if they're trying to show you that something's important, it is suggesting that this is something that they are trying to say to you. So be on the lookout for anything that has been repeated, and that will really help you to unpack the text. So there's a whole range of techniques that you can identify, and I'm happy to give you these helpful lists of all sorts of techniques that you can identify in texts. But these are ones here are the basics, and I would suggest that you start with these. Get your head around these, understand what they are, understand the individual features, but more importantly, understand why they are used. Okay, tip 4, know your visual techniques. So in the past, there has always been a visual text in section 1, and it's always the first text. Last year, they didn't have one, but I'm not confident that they'll do the same this year. So you never know what's going to be in the exam. They may put a visual text in and they may not. I think it's best that we are prepared for a visual text. So do you know the visual techniques of visual texts? For example, colour and tone. Can you identify contrast or juxtaposition in a visual text? What about framing? Are you familiar with close-up or long shots or bird's eye or high angle, low angle? Are you familiar with the rule of 3? What about gaze, offer and demand? Or positioning? How the composer has positioned the content of their visual text, what parts of the image have greater weight than others, or salience. What is the most prominent object or feature in this visual text? What do you see as the one that stands out the most? Or can you identify symbolism in a visual text? All vectors, the lines that create a reading path that force your eyes to be drawn to a particular part or move around a text. These are all aspects of visual techniques. And just like with the language features that we looked at before, you need to be familiar with these as well. And you need to have them all in your toolkit. You need to be able to identify and explain the effect of these.